morning, Internet. Welcome back to Bunny Hall Making a Life by the Sea. I think today I'm going to give a basic garden tour. I'm really inspired. Two of my favorite garden YouTubers are Laura at Garden Answer and Roots and Refuge. And Roots and Refuge, for example, she does a weekly garden tour, which I have no intention of doing that. Well, maybe in the future. But my garden is still so rough and tumble. But I thought, it'd be good to share the garden as it progresses through the summer, even though it's a work in progress. I also wanted to start today's garden tour with one of my favorite garden writers. He's no longer with us, Beverly Nichols, an English writer who probably his most famous book is Mary Hall, about his making over his big country house he bought I think that was in the 50s. The quote I'm going to read, though, is from A Thatched Roof, which is one of my favorite books by him that he wrote in the 30s, where he made over a beautiful thatched cottage, which actually reminds me so much of my own little cottage on Cape Cod, which I still have not shared that place with you, but I shall do. So before we begin the garden tour, which is going to have a bit of weeds in it, I thought I would read this passage, which I always think of when I'm in my garden. Now, he's speaking about he had come back from America and brought a pot of ivy and forgotten about it. It languished in a box somewhere for months. When he found it again, he planted it and it came back. And so this is what he's speaking of there. So I'll just read this from A Thatched Roof by Beverly Nichols. Have you the same odd affection for things, like my ivy, which show tremendous courage in the face of adversity? For plants and animals and people, even if they are common plants and worthless animals and dull people? It may be a purely personal weakness, but I feel that somewhere there must be someone who shares it with me. Often in the garden I have found some plant that has seated itself in a spot where you'd think its frail roots could not possibly gain a hold. Perhaps it is only a common rock plant, but that has pitched its gay camp on some windswept barren wall, and it's flying its yellow flag in the teeth of every wind. We have much wind here. But though it is common, the miraculous courage of such a plant defeats me. I could no more destroy it, even if it is an intruder, than I could tear up a rose tree that was decked in all the crimson regalia of July. I often feel that way about plants here, though I have to freely admit that I pull weeds and move plants quite often. And sometimes the weeds that are sprung up here and there aren't there because of my kindness, but because of my inability to get to them. But often, and sometimes, as the plant I'm about to show you, a plant will find its way despite your even maybe trying to stop it or animals trying to stop it. And because of that, I haven't the heart to move it. So I'm going to start this morning's small garden tour with that plant, the Native American inkberry plant, which in Massachusetts at least is considered a weed, but in English countryside gardens is considered a treasure. So let's go take our garden tour, shall we? So the main element in which I'm talking about for this garden tour, and from the quote I was just reading, is this here. Here you will see this somewhat of a wild hedge of lovely rugosa roses. I'm not really sure of the variety, and I will tell you that because when we came to be the caretakers of this house, when it was our turn 5 years ago, the entire front of this house was covered with brambles, thorns, my nemesis bittersweet, which as you can see there is starting to take up the wall again. We're constantly fighting it. But I didn't even discover these roses were roses until after the first year of cutting things back. So long story shorter is we cut 2 years ago I started trying to hedge these roses, and I realized that they would be a pretty good hedge. And so this year I hedged them up a bit as well, and unlike my actual roses, which I tried out front, which will no longer be growing here, these roses are completely devoid of being hurt by deer. The deer don't seem to even care about them. So they give off a lovely scent. They only bloom for about 3 weeks, but the scent is wonderful. So now, the quote I was reading about the stray plant and the strength of the random plant and not having the heart to take something out is, this here in New England is considered a weed. It is a Native American inkberry, an Indian inkberry, an ink plant. It has many names, but this is just the growth from 1 year. In 1 year, it starts from nothing but a seed and gets this tall and taller. And you can see here the little growth, those little flowers, those will turn into these beautiful deep purple berries that were used as ink by the Pilgrims. So now why I've left this in this bed is it planted itself here. Well, the birds planted it here. It started to come up. I was going to take it out, but then the deer came one night and ate everything down and ate the top of this down. And then it flushed back so well that I thought of the quote by Beverly Nichols that I just read to you, and I just didn't have the heart to take it out. And another reason why I've decided to keep the inkberry here is in English gardens. It was a few years ago. I was in a country house, and I noticed these growing in a herbaceous border. And when I talked to the gardener, he asked if I knew what it was, and I said, "Oh yes, I do know." And he was so proud of it, and they had planted it on purpose. It was beautiful in the border. And I explained to him that in America they're considered, at least in Massachusetts, they're considered a weed. But it looked so lovely that I thought, you know what? I am going to keep it there. And that's sort of the way that Beverly Nichols didn't have the heart to tear up his old ivy. I don't have the heart to take out this inkberry because it's made it through my not noticing it, through the thorny roses, and even after one big deer feast, so it stays. Now that's intentional. A lot of the garden tour I can show you today isn't necessarily intentional, it's just I haven't the time. We have 3 acres. About 1.5 acres or 2 of it is wood, which we are also trying to clear out. That will be another video. Clear out in the sense of trying to make beautiful paths and plant in new trees, take out bad trees. But so for example, this border here along the sea. Now obviously I've planted these 2 terracottas with evergreens. You can see a little terracotta statue peeking out back there. And planted amongst these are things I did on purpose. The coreopsis, the salvia. Now that's wild yarrow, but I've also planted native yarrow. In here, which you can't tell now, it hasn't started to get its red color, I planted a red twig dogwood. But now these are a weed. This grass is a weed, if you will. But what I have come to appreciate being here is I cut a path through here. I laid wood chips last year. Obviously you can see I need a new path of wood chips. I let a lot of the wild things grow here because they're beautiful. It can still look like a garden, and it still is enjoyable to see that grass blowing. And I've also come to realize I've purchased grass on purpose and planted it in my garden. So when tufts of wild native grass do this on their own, I just leave them. And now when I really attack this border and put flowers around, I will probably leave these clusters and then plant new flowers around. Like for example, last year I planted, these have already gone by, but these are some of my iris, that bearded iris, which look really nice. They don't look nice now, obviously. They need to be, here's an area that needs to be underplanted. But that's an idea of me enjoying the garden as it is, but trying to make a bit of a difference. Now, where I've put a little bit more effort into making over borders is our front garden, which is on the roadside. So let's go there. So here in our front garden, which faces the road, which is a private road, you can see our hydrangeas here are so much happier. I mean, they're happily full of blooms. I mean, look at the brilliant blue of these. Again, this is the Cape Cod soil for you. The magnificent blue. And if we back up, this is the border. I started this 2 years ago, and it is mainly shade. It just gets early morning sun and then shade for the rest of the day, so it's the perfect spot to, first of all, make it when the water's not doing well as it is this year. But I love hostas, I love hydrangeas, I love ferns. And here you can see another weed. I think this is another inkberry, but I'm leaving that this year by choice. There's a couple other weeds though I probably will pull, so I suppose my kindness towards the weed is slightly varied. And then here are my favorite, my coveted bloomstruck hydrangeas that bloom in this amazing purple shade. They look a little pink on the camera, but they're actually deep purple. And then various pots. And then this little bit was originally going to be a rose garden, which I've now changed my mind because all of the roses, such as this one here has come back, but the roses have got ate up by the deer. They come in and just eat the roses right off. So that's why the other morning when I saw the buds forming on my white lily, oh, I was so excited because I thought, can we get these lilies before the deer find them? And behind them are the very common orange daylilies that are very popular around here. But again, I don't disparage them. I love them. They're tough as old boots. They just go on and on. But anyway, here's my white lily blooming, and the deer have not found it, so let's not let them go. And this is some lovely lavender full of bees. Now, I had intended for this whole stone wall that we're building here to be rimmed in lavender, which may do. We shall see. Oh, this was another fun experiment. This is a yellowish cypress, and I can't remember the name, but I planted a climbing, a clematis, a purple clematis. I think it must be a 2, because if it were 3, I don't think it would be blooming yet. However, I just wanted that purple against the yellow of the tree. Now, the tree will probably move in maybe 3 or 4 years because I don't want a giant evergreen there. But for now, it served its purpose, and once the orange of these daylilies mixed with the yellow and the purple, I put a lot of color here, despite the fact that the border here is mainly white, green, and blues. So if we follow this little stone wall that we're working on, I've just started. Last year I put in a row of box, which luckily are deer resistant. Now my goal and hope is to have many boxwoods around here. I'm just not sure when and how, because they are not inexpensive. But this is a mainly shade border, so I put in a new hosta, and then I planted another pot with some shade-loving coleus and begonias. And so I have a trio of hostas here, and then more annuals added in. So again, all a work in progress. And this here is more of our bush type honeysuckle, which does quite well here. I was going to cut it out because this is where the box hedge is going to go, but for now I'm going to keep trimming it, and once the box match it in intensity, I'm going to keep it trimmed. But we just dumped another pile of rocks here from the hole we've been digging, because I'm going to continue this rock wall along the front of the house here. So let's walk over to this little shade garden. Oh, and again, here's another example of how the shade and the blocking of the house of the sea winds and salt air, look how that hydrangea it's in heaven. It gets the right amount of airflow, but not heavy wind. It gets no salt air on it. It gets morning sun, dappled sun through the day, and it just blooms to its heart's content. And I can actually see it out of the hallway that leads to my studio in the house, so I love that. And here's a little painted Japanese fern poking through. And this is my little wood area, and this is just a tiny little pond I made. It's basically my version of a bird bath, because I have little birds, including our little bird in I have 2 urns here. I love to sit here in the afternoon, particularly if it's hot, because it's so nice and shady. And in here, oh, have they fledged? Let's see if they've fledged. No, you can see the little darlings. Can you see the little baby birds in there? I don't want to scare them out, but there are little darling little baby birds in there. Oh, I don't know if you can see them. Oh, but they're so sweet. Little nuthatches. And look how close it is to the ground. But in my studio, I'll come into the hall, look out this window, and I'll see the nuthatch bobbing around in the pond, getting its drink, sitting on the head of my lady or on the head of our old man in the sea. And many birds come here. They love this wood pile. It's full of insects. And in a video the other day, I interplanted this ivy and hosta and evergreen I have here with coleus, because in the shade garden I found I like to take coleus and just kind of intersperse it as if it's almost like a wild plant that just grew up. And this is a new addition. That big knotted root there is this year from the giant hole we dug, which I think I shared in another video, where we're having to dig up our yard because we need new water installed in our old house. And these in the back, these are honesty or money plants. They have many names, and they are going to seed, but I let them grow. Just like the the clover back there, I just let that weed itself, because it's so dry and shady here that until we get our water back, any green at this point is worth it. So let's just take a moment to appreciate the color of the coleus, the beauty of the gnarled wood, of the roots and the wood wall, along the path of the ivy, the thug of the ivy, but I'm encouraging it, to the hostas and the slices of wood, the old man in the sea statue, and the lady who is actually a pump, but has not spread water for years. And then along into a few ferns, and then the lovely brilliant blue of the hydrangea, along the heuchera colors, and then behind the heuchera you can see the pink hydrangea, which I mentioned in another video, I purchased on purpose because our soil does not allow hydrangeas to be pink, but this is a variety which I was told would bloom pink. And I'm still not sure how I feel about it. Now I think the color is beautiful with that, the almost dusty purple of the heuchera next to it. So I think if I plant more deep purples, more heucheras, maybe another Japanese fern, I think I shall like that pink. If I don't like it, then next spring I will dig it up and take it to my antique cottage on the Cape, which I will share that one day. So this garden tour is probably a bit silly, and it started out pointing out how sometimes I don't have the heart to remove weeds. Mostly it's because I haven't the time to keep up with it, but sometimes it's intentional. Here's an example of intent. These are my pots, which of course I planted on purpose. Now here's an example. This blue fescue grass right here was planted on purpose. I went to a garden center, I purchased it, and I happily mixed it with my annual petunias and my perennial salvia, a pink variety of salvia. I like to do pinks and purples up here. And I have my pot of annuals, but next to it, growing behind it on the log, is more grass. Now this is native grass. This is simply the grass that our lawn is made of, what's left of our lawn. But it looks so pretty that I let it grow, and I thought, and when I weed whack, I just leave it because I figure I've intentionally purchased grass. Why not let the natural grass grow? Look over here, this is another blue fescue I've added into my pot border here. And that's intentional, so why not let other native grasses grow? And here's our little bunny statue that's at the front entrance of one of the drives to the house, as this is Bunny Hall. And the pot, which matches its brother, I showed over there, and another pink salvia. And these are the seed heads of my newly, just tried this past season, alliums, and they worked out so beautifully, and the deer didn't like them at all. So this fall I'm going to take my budget for bulbs and put it completely into alliums and daffs, the two things the deer do not like, but I love. And then this low-growing pine was just added this year, and then I added this yellow evergreen here, which will do fine once it gets established. I moved it at a pretty large state. So, as you can see, I have my little garden beds interspersed with what grows wild. And of course, this is the entrance to our wood. Now, we've started to clear the wood, and that's going to be a video in and of itself. But you can see the pathway there is starting to be cleared out. But it's so dense with weeds and bittersweet and thorns. But mixed in it are beautiful pines and the most amazing rhododendrons. Now, next year, I'll have been blogging or vlogging, so I can share the rhododendrons. And then for the rest of this garden tour, I guess I will just simply show my pots. Now I did share these in a previous video, but that was a week and a half ago, so the good thing about garden tours is you can see how things have changed. The smoke bush is, we have both a purple smoke bush, which you can see in the distance, which I'm going to trim up this fall to see if I can get it a little smaller like this. Because this beautiful smoke bush, look at it, it's lovely. Especially when you see it this way with the sea behind. Isn't it breathtaking? And then when you come down to my little potted plant, you have the pink of the petunias, the yellowy froth of the smoke bush, and just that sliver of blue sea. I love that. So this is another of the other end of our circle drive. We have this potted plant with the smoke bush. Let's continue on the garden tour going under the magnolia up to my pots. Now this fence, which obviously is not very matched, I just put in this year. It still needs finials, it needs stain as soon as I choose a color, it needs more trim. But for now, it is the border for my vegetable garden and a privacy, or not a privacy, but a windbreak for the garden on this side from the sea. So I've planted up as many evergreens as I could find. This is my new blue spruce, which I love. I wanted a blue pine. And for the summer plantings, I've done coleus under. And the coleus is doing pretty good. I just love that shock of pinky greens under planting a pine. I'm sure it's probably kind of an odd combination, but the evergreens are helpful. And in the spring I plant petunias. In the summer, whatever I choose. This year is coleus. And then in the autumn, I plant mums. So here are more pots, brimming with coleus. Another pine with coleus. And this is my sort of Christmas tree. I will cover this in lights. And in fact, this winter, I think since I now have all these pots lined up like this, along the fence along the front of our house, even though it's a private road and only a few neighbors are here in the winter, I think I'm going to line all these with Christmas lights this year. So if you see this here, we're now on the other side of the little shade garden I was showing you with the coleus. So that is the double wood pile wall there. This is just the side directly on the road. If you look this way, I mean, it's a private road, as I said. It's basically part of our private drive. And then on the other side of this wood wall is the shade garden I shared with you a few minutes ago. And there you can see the bench and the urns with the little nuthatch nesting inside. Oh, and out front there I have a little plant stand. I move some of my houseplants outside in the summer because this side of the house is amazing for houseplants because it gets very little sun, but just enough that they go crazy. I almost feel bad bringing them back in the fall. Of course they would die if I didn't, but. And then now this is a new border here, and you can see the deer found these hosta, yet I've planted other new hosta that they seem to not have found, and two new ferns here, which I'm really excited about. These ferns, which are, I saved the tag, these ferns, I have three of these, two here and one on the other side. They are a Godzilla fern. And you can see I got them on clearance for $3. So hopefully by next year those should be quite large and lovely here. So I do love shade gardening, but of course the front of our garden faces the sea and it's in constant sun. So I think that should be it for today's garden tour. I just wanted to share some of the garden, show that even though it's very weedy and does need a lot of work, that I still enjoy it, and that I think gardening teaches us patience and also teaches us to appreciate what we have in the midst of what we wish we had. We may not have everything we hope at the moment, but if we look for those good things, like this beautiful blue hydrangea that is here right now, it helps us enjoy that moment so that we can look forward to the future, but relish and love the present. Okay, I guess that's it for the tour. Well, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for joining me today at Bunny Hall, Making a Life by the Sea. And I hope you enjoyed my simple little garden tour, despite or maybe because of the weeds. Some left because of inability to get to them, but one at least left the inkberry on purpose. So until tomorrow, thanks again for joining me at Bunny Hall, Making a Life by the Sea. Cheers. Now I wonder if I can get some beach combing in before the day is over.